Okay, so we had this question that started on the bottom of 69a about things that the elephant digests, these palm branches that come out like palm branches. Is that considered animal fodder? Is that considered like animal dung? And therefore it's going to not mekabel tuma? That's right, or not. So that was the question. Is that considered, on the one hand, it went through the system, so maybe it's the same, and therefore it's not mekabel tuma, it does not receive tuma, not susceptible to tuma, or maybe not, because it came out the same way it came in, so maybe it doesn't qualify exactly as the classic dung, and therefore it would be mekabel tuma. So we're 1, 2, 3, 5 lines on 69b. Tivshalem. And the one flesh cannot. So they said, yeah, they're metaher the basar. It's not something which is mekabel tuma. So even though the flesh is here, that's like the palm branches that go through the animal. You see that when it goes through, that's the qualification. As long as it goes through, the fact that it's still intact is irrelevant. So we say, no, you can't bring a proof from there because shiny basar derachich, the flesh is very, very soft. So since the flesh is very soft, so therefore maybe you can't compare it. Maybe only something which is so soft. I guess maybe it gets softer when it goes through, or yeah, you have to know why exactly does soft make it since it's very soft, maybe it was digested more, and therefore you can't bring a proof of something with like a palm branch which is more intact. So okay, so part of that price, if the timuas hatzamos owns that they can contain it, even though it goes through the system. If it's still intact, it does contaminate. It says, well, no, shiny hatzamos that kushek today. Those are very hard. The bone hard, and therefore it's more intact, and therefore you can't bring a proof to the palm branches, which are less hard and less intact. So the question remains unanswered. So, by Rabbi Zera, says Rabbi Zera, now this is an interesting case. You have wheat that literally means it came down in the clouds. Now, Rashi seems to say it's like some kind of tornado kind of thing that like it wiped through the water and it lifted up either from a ship or lifted up a lot of wheat and then dropped it off on land. That's the way Rashi learns. And Tos has a problem with that because basically, what's your question? If the wheat came, we'll see in a second, from outside of Israel, so then to take off any but what's this of wheat that was dropped down from the clouds? Says Marlamai, for what? Menachos, for the Menachos, you want to bring a flour offering? Great. Amai go for it, no restrictions. You want to bring it for the 2 breads. So the Gemara asks, Mai mi moshvo seichem amarachmana. So the Gemara asks, it says that you bring it, the wheat, from your dwelling places. So practically, I think it means Eretz Yisrael. Mi moshvo seichem. Where's the verse? Yeah. Taviu lechem tenufa. So amarachmana la'afuke dechutz la'aretz delo comes to exclude outside of Israel, but maybe only outside of Israel. Aval da'avim shapir dami, but maybe from the clouds is fine. O dilma, or maybe mimosho seichem dafka vafilu da'avim, specifically from your dwelling places, from Eretz Yisrael, and even from the clouds. Sorry, vafilu da'avim namilo. Sorry, from your living places and not from the clouds. So it for sure excludes outside of Israel. The question is, Does it exclude the clouds or exclude the clouds as well or not? That's the question. So the problem is I was thinking this also, a very logical problem. That Tosa says, I don't understand. Where is the wheat from? If the wheat kernels were, like Rashi says, were swept up outside of Israel, what's the question? They came from outside of Israel. And if they were swept up from within Israel, so what's the problem? The wheat came from Israel. So what's the question with the clouds? That's the question, Rashi. So they say something which they say it was actually miraculous that wheat came down from the clouds. That's the case we're talking about. And they refer to a Gemara in Sanhedrin, which talks also about food coming down miraculously. So one answer they bring from Rashi is that word Mimosho Sechem, which means Eretz Yisrael. But I at first thought that this was a simple understanding. Mimosho Sechem doesn't just mean Eretz Yisrael, but it means actually from your living places, from the place that you actually live. So when the Gemara says Mimosho Sechem to exclude outside of the land, it doesn't just mean outside of Eretz Yisrael, but it means any place that you don't live, like in the clouds. I mean, some people live in the clouds, but so that's very interesting. So either this case of the clouds is a miraculously wheat came down from the clouds. That's one understanding, or the other understanding is no, some kind of tornado-like thing that picked up the wheat and dropped it down. Okay, so on this, the Gemara says, did this really happen? It says, it did. The Eddie Taya, there was this guy named Eddie the Arab, that Nachisale Rom Kizvachiti Betlata Parsi. There came down a measurement, a kizba, a measurement of wheat that spanned across 3 parsos, the length of 3 parsos, and that's how big his field was. So Eddie the merchant got rich that day. Yeah. So Bayi Rabbi Shimon ben Pazi. Okay, so now ask Rabbi Shimon ben Pazi the following: you have ears of grain, shiboles shehevia shlish. It got to a third. Sounds like before a third, it's not really considered any kind of growth that's significant. So it got to a third though. Now, if you would leave it, the Omer, I think we'll see later, still will permit it. The problem is you uprooted it. So after it was 1/3 grown, you uprooted it. Shehevia shlish kodim laomer ba'akra, you uprooted it. V'shasla la'achar omer. So you finished all your Pesach cleaning early. So instead of rubbing it into everyone else, you went to go uproot your grain as your activity. Tell the kids to go play in the backyard. So they went, they uprooted the grain. And then after the Omer, you decided, you know what? A bad idea. My father's grain. So you decided to go replant it. So you replant this afterwards. And now it expanded, it grew a lot. So Vosifa Mahu. Do you go after Basar Ikar Azlinan? Do you go after the original root, which was 1/3, before the Omer was brought, and therefore you permitted it? Odilma Basar Tosefas Azlinan. Or you say, no, look, it's a whole new crop. Before it was 1/3, now I have a field full of grain. 1 second, but that field full of grain was not there when the Omer was brought. Now you have to wait till the next Omer to bring it. So Odilma Basar Tosefas Azlinan, and therefore the Achiyava Omer Haba, until you get to the next Omer. Oh, okay. So this is a general question. You have something which at its root was permitted for the Omer. But you look at the product now, and all that extra growth was not there before the Omer. So do you go after the root or after the final product? So Tivshulei Meha. Answer from the following, conclude from the following. The Amar Rabbi Abo, says Rabbi Abo, in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, we're getting a lot of agriculture coming up in the next today and tomorrow. The Amar, or maybe only today, we'll see. So Mehadam Rabbi Abo, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. So you have Yalda Shesavcha Bezekena. So you have a case where you have a planting of orla. So orla, the first 3 years, you can't benefit from the tree. And then it produced fruit, and you took it and grafted it with a tree that was more than 3 years old. So you have one tree that's less than 3 years old, prohibited. One tree that's more than 3 years old. And now what happens? it produced even 200 more times than you had originally. That's the amount you need to nullify orla. If orla, a fruit of orla gets mixed in a bunch, so how much does it take to nullify? 200. So in this case, you have the original orla. You grafted it with a tree that's already called the zakein and old. Once you're past 3 years old, you're old already. Yeah, so you're old, and now it grew even 200 more times than the original amount. So the question is it prohibited because you go after the original root, right? Or you say it's permitted because look at it. Come on, 1,000 fruits have grown from a tree that's more than 3 years old. You're right, but the root of the tree is still here, and that root was prohibited. So, Yalda shesafka bezekinu bapeiros afilu hosi b'masayim aser, even more than 200 is aser. Also, what do you see? That you go after the original. That you go after the original. You go after the original root. So, our case also. The Almer of Shomar Nachmani, another conclusion for this question, another way to answer this question. You have a onion, and it was planted in a vineyard, which is prohibited. It's kilayim. It's a forbidden mixture. You're putting onions and grapes together. So what did you do, though? You now removed the vineyard part. You uprooted those. V'nekar karam. And now you just let the onions grow regularly. So first they had onions, you grafted them, and then you let them grow. So now, afilu hosi b'masayim, even if more than 200 onions grew, still prohibited because that original root was a root that was prohibited originally. That's going to be prohibited. So when you have one fruit and you have 200 other fruits, these 200, it's two species, right? So then it can nullify. But here it's one thing, it's one root. So that one root doesn't get nullified. So, okay. So that seems to be a conclusion to our question that you after if the original body is still here, even if the offshoot of it, the growth of it is much more, but the original body is still here. So, yeah. So we say, he gufa kami ba'ilei. So this actually itself was the question. Do you say, in these cases where we're stringent, are we stringent because we concluded that you go after the root and that's why you're stringent? You always go after the original root. Either you're lenient and you're stringent. That's the rule that we concluded. You go after the original root. Dilma may be like this. Svukim misafkalu. We're actually not sure which way to go. And therefore we're stringent. Ulechumra amrinan, but lekula lo amrinan. So that was really the question. We're actually not, maybe you conclude you after the root. Or you say, we actually don't conclude. We actually don't know what to do. And therefore, we have to be stringent. We can't be lenient. That the original root was a root of prohibition. Either it was orla, or it was a forbidden mixture. So now you have 300 times the amount of permitted growths, but you have a forbidden root. So which way do you go? Growth, root. Growth permitted, root prohibited. So you always go after the root, whether it's or stringency, or you say no. We actually don't. Therefore, we have to err on that of caution, and it's be prohibited. Okay. Bayi Rava. So Rava says le'inyan meiser mai. Regarding the tithes, what's the halacha? Says Amara, what's the case? Hey Chidami, what's the case? Next page. She go into amdinhu the asrinhu. What did you do? You evaluated and you tithed. Amdinhu v'asrinhu. Yeah, you reap some ears of grain, v'asrinhu, and you took off tithes. Yeah, you tied them, okay. And then you replanted them. And then you replanted them. So, okay, so what's the question? So, imtim talomar lo azlinan basar ikar. Do you say, so now you have these grains that you cut them off, you tied them, and then So let's say you have, I don't know, whatever it is, you have 100 ears of grain. So you separate 10 for Meiser. Fine. You can replant it. Do you have to take off tithes from them or not? They originally were taking off tithes, but now they grew. So do you say imtim telom lo azlinan basar ikr v'tosefes by yisurei? If you want to tell me lo azlinan basar ikr that you don't go after the root, and this additional growth v'tosefes by yisurei does require tithes, so then does require tithes. So ikr mai. So yeah, meaning the original tithes were based off of these grains. If you replanted these grains and you go after their growth, you have to go back to the original tithes and now do another tithing because I guess those were not really significant anymore. So, second. Do you have to go back to the original tithes and do a new tithing or not? So, okay. So, Ma'ishna, Amrle Abai says, Ma'ishna mikol chiti. Why is it different than any wheat or barley? Dalma. Why is it different than anything that that even though you took up the tithes, if you went back and you planted it, so the new ones need tithes and the old one needs tithes. So says Amrle as follows. Rabbi said back to him, it depends. Davar shezaro kala lo mibayle. Something with the original seed got consumed. It's no longer around, like wheat and barley, that the seed, when you put it into the ground, it thank you, yeah, that's where it decomposes. So then so that we're not asking about because that for sure needs a new tithe. It's a whole different crop. So that for sure needs a whole new tithing. Ella kimi baile, when are we asking? Davar she'ein zaro kala. When you have something which the seed does not fully decompose. So that you want to know, is it a new crop or not? And then you have to know, was the original tithing significant or not? 1 second. Yeah. Okay. So Tif Sholei Meha, answer from the following. The Amr of Yitzchak, Amr of Yochanan, says Rav Yitzchak in the name of Rav Yochanan, litra basalt, so a measurement of onions, shetiknu that you took off your trumas and maestros from, you fixed it up. It's vizaro, and then you went, and then you replanted them, yeah? So, misaser lefikulu, you have to take off a new tithe from the whole thing. So what do you see? That you have to take off a new tithe. It's a whole new thing. Even that first amount that you took off is going to need a new take off meiser again, because and here, even though the seed did not fully decompose, but still, once it got replanted and grew again, so you have to go back and take off from the whole thing again. So meaning, let's say you have originally, I don't know, 100, whatever it is, sheaves, or 100 onions, and you took off 10. And then you went and replanted it, and now you got 200. Well, now you have a whole new crop. That original 10 is insignificant. It's only significant when you had 100. When you have 200, you have to take off 20. So do you have to go back and do that again or not? So we see from the onions, even though the seed did not decompose, that you do. So litra batzal shetiknu v'zar mis'asher lefikulu. Says where it's not a proof. Why not? Hasam hainu zriyaso. Hacha lav hainu zriyaso. There by the onion, that was hainu zriyaso. I guess it's normal to replant onions, but hacha where you by the ears of grain, lav hain Israel. So that's not the normal way to go and to replant it. Okay. Okay. So Amr le Rav Chanina bar Yumi le Abaye said he says to Abaye, Otzitz she'enu nakus. So biblically, to take off Trumas it has to be something that gets its nourishment from the land of Israel. In Otzitz she'enu nakov, in Otzitz, which is not so meaning it's like a pot. It's like your pot where you have a plant where there's no holes in the bottom. So it's not getting its nourishment from the land of Israel. So that's not biblically going to be liable. In tidings. So atzit she'enu nakov, mahu. So what's the question? So the question is, I think if that gets replanted, 1 second. Yeah, can you? The way Rashi says is that can you take off? You have two plants, two growths from a non-perforated vessel. So can you take off ties? They're rabbinic from one onto another. So says the Gemara. So he says Mahu. So ilo nakuv. So halo nakuv. What's the problem? It's not perforated. No, but the question is dilma chazer v'nakvu ka'amris. So the question is maybe you ended up going back and you perforated it, and therefore we're not sure because you can't take off biblically obligated tithes. That can't be exempt by rabbinically obligated tithes. So that's our question. Dilma chazer v'nakvu ka'amris. Maybe you went back and you perforated it, and now you want to know, can you take off one onto the other? Says the Gemara, Hacha says, Hacha chadaz riyahi, ichburehu dechamechabra, ve'ola. So in this case, 1 second. Yeah, so you have this non-perforated vessel, and the grain grew on some level, and then maybe you perforated it. So now, do you have to take off tithes from it? Meaning, right, like this. You have one vessel, and that one vessel was not perforated. But then we're worried, maybe you went back and you perforated it. So what happened? Your original growth was rabbinic, because it was a non-perforated vessel, a very big flower pot, right? So then we're worried you might have went back and perforated it. Now, if you did that and it's getting sustenance now from the land of Israel, so that's going to be biblically obligated tithes. So same question as before. Do you go after the root or you go after the growth? If you go after the root, then you can't take off tithes from here onto itself because one's rabbinic and one's going to be one's biblical. So you can't take off from the original root onto the additional growth because that's taking off from biblically exempt tithings onto biblically obligated tithings. Or maybe you'll say that no, the original root follows the growth, and therefore you go after the growth, not after the root, and therefore you're going to have to take off tithes because you're going to view it as a biblically obligated to take off tithes. Yeah. Okay, that's the question. So now, here it's really one. It's attached. It's one growth. So there, it's attached to itself. So ve'ola hasam shtei zriyos minhu. So here, when you perforated it, so it began to now get nourishment from land of Israel. However, Rava's question before with the grain, so you took that grain and then you ended up replanting it. So that's where we had our question. Here, so what would you do here? Here it's not comparable because it's different than before. Here it's one growth. It's one plant. There you took the grains and you replanted them, so two growths. Okay, so, but what would be the law over here? Yeah, they're going to say that it's one thing, and therefore and therefore I think you would have to take off tithes from this plant, as opposed to the case before, which is two different growths. You cut the sheaves and then you replanted them. That's where we have a question: do you after the original, or do you after the growth? But I guess in this case, you would take off. You go after the growth, and then you view it as biblically obligated in tithes.
We do not ever find a case truma in produce that is attached to the ground from this Mishnah. We see that it rooted again cannot become designated truma. It follows that in the case presented by Rabbi Bayahu, the grain is not truma. Question mark.
Answer for a second. You have a footnote to answer this question. Let's just see. Where are we? Yeah. Okay. In our case, yeah. What would happen? Yeah. Okay. Good. We're here. That's what I thought. So in the case where it's really one growth and you happen to perforate it, so in this one growth, there you'll go after it's really one growth, and therefore you'll view it as biblically obligated in tithes. Our case where it's two separate growths, you took the sheaves, you cut them off, and you replanted them. That's where we have our question. So you can't bring a proof from here. Okay. By Rabbi Abo. Rabbi Abo asks the following question. Shiboles. So you have his ears of grain. Shemercha b'kri. So ruach hakri is a smoothing of the pile. It's the last step of your of the process, and therefore that's what determines its meiser status. So that's when you're liable in meiser. So you got to the last step, and now you're liable to take off tithes. And now v'shasla, and you went and you replanted it. V'kara aleha sham b'mechubar, and you went and you took off truma while it was attached to the ground. Is that considered truma or not? Well, on the one hand, given the miracle tavla, once it gets smoothing of the pile, it took on the status of tevel. Tevel is the opposite. Tevel is now produce that has not been tithed. It doesn't have that status until you finish the process. Once you finish the process, so two things happen simultaneously. You're obligated now to take off trumas and meisers, and until you do that, it's considered tevel. And if you consume it, you're the death in the hands of heaven. So you took it and you put it into the ground, though. Do you say, though, listen, on the one hand, you finished it, it was tevel, take off truma. So therefore, kimercha tavalla, kikarala Hashem, kachala, you sanctified that part, and that's truma now. Oh, Dilma, no. Once you replanted it, so you restarted. Oh, Dilma came in the shlasla, pakale tavla, it's no longer tevel. Pakale tavla mina, it's no longer tevel. So how do you view it? Something which was obligated, then you replanted it, and then you said it's truma. Can you uproot its previous tevel status or not? Amri le Rabbanan le'abai, says Rabban Tabai, in Cain, if you're going to tell me that this would work, matzinu truma b'mechubar lekarka. You're going to end up telling me that there's truma, things that are valid for truma, while it's attached to the ground. But that can't be. Tanan lo matzinu truma b'mechubar lekarka. The Mishnah says explicitly you cannot find truma attached to the ground. Truma can only be when it's detached from the ground. Amar le kitanya hi. 1 second. That Mishnah was telling you that to be liable death, or to be liable if you eat it inadvertently, to pay the price plus a fifth. It was saying that's only going to be true when it's attached to the ground. So kitanya hila the e talish. So therefore, Now, that Mishnah was talking about the ultimate, the liable for death, and the fifth, you pay if you eat it inadvertently. So now to eat talish v'achil, well, what's the case? If you remove it from the ground and eat it, that's considered talishu. That's removed, not attached to the ground. What's the case that you're eating truma attached to the ground? If you take it off with your hand, so now it's no longer attached to the ground. If you're bending down, eating from the ground, well, that's not normal. So, your weird eating tactics, are nullified compared to everyone else's, and therefore that's not considered an act of eating. You eat abnormally. So, yeah. So now, on this, the Gemara says, that how is this different than that which was written in the ledger of Ilfa? The case was Beitze Nevelas Oaf. You have eggs of a bird carcass that wasn't slaughtered properly, and there's eggs in there. So Beitze Nevelas Oaf Atar, a kosher bird that was never slaughtered properly, has eggs. Miktasan Bachutz uMiktasan Bifnim. Some of the eggs are in the bird, some of the eggs are outside the bird. Mi bifnim, the ones, if you consume the ones that are inside the bird, just like the bird will contaminate your clothing. If you eat it, it's an avela, it's a carcass. So, mi bifnim mitamin begadim, a base of mi bechutz ein mitamin begadim base of the eggs inside the animal, when you consume them, they'll contaminate you and your clothing. The eggs outside the bird will not contaminate you or your clothing. Now, Rashi learns, I think they argue on him. Rashi learns that, you actually bent down and put your mouth inside the innards of the birds and ate the eggs. So, So we said, what's the difference? Sounds like this. If you bend down and eat from the inside of the bird, that's going to contaminate you. Why don't you say that's abnormal, just like eating from the ground is? So, says the Gemara, no. Talush avidi ini the achli haki. To remove the truma, that's normal to eat. You remove from the ground and you eat it. B'mechuber lo avidi inchi achli, but to eat from the ground is not something which is normal. Apparently, eating it from the inside of the bird is not so abnormal. That's what it sounds like. That's what.
The eggs were just in the bird, so it fell out.
No, they're still in the bird.
Some are in the bird. And some
you ate from the ones inside the bird. Yeah. Outside the bird. Yeah.
Yeah. But they came from the bird.
They came from the bird.
Mm-hmm.
So the ones that are inside the bird have the same status as the bird itself, and therefore they're going to contaminate you.
Okay.
The ones outside the bird do not have the same status as the bird, and therefore they will not contaminate you. That's right. Yeah, I'm not sure. I assume they're not kosher. The question is, do they contaminate you like the status of a nevela?
Right.
Okay. Amar Rav Tavyumi bar Kisna, says Rav Tavyumi, the son of Kisna. Amar Shmuel, Hazoreya kilayim, if you plant forbidden mixtures, the atzitz she'enu nakov, in a non-perforated pot. So, says the Gemara, it's usher. Now, this also, I believe, only rabbinical, because it's not getting its sustenance from the land of Israel. So, or from the ground. So, just usher, prohibited. Amar Abaye says, I understand if you'd have told me I get lashes rabbinically, that would have been good. Ella usher my, but just usher, just prohibited. So just prohibited. So what is that? What is that? Kamash Malon, it's coming to teach you the following. The Midirabanan Havyazriya. It's coming to tell you that even though it was in a pot that was not perforated, it's still forbidden to mix, let's say, the onions and the vines in such a way. So it's just teaching you that it's rabbinically prohibited to do. So says the Gemara, Tanina, Tara Misheinu Nakov, Ala Nakov. Tara Misheinu, you take off truma from a pot that is not perforated. Al Hanakov, on one that is perforated. Truma, the Yakzir V'Yitro. So we see here that it's called truma. Truma he, the yagzar, meaning it's called truma, but it sounds like you still have to go and do it again biblically. But from the fact that we refer to it as truma, so we see that the growth is a valid rabbinic growth, because the Mishnah says if you have a pot that's not perforated and a pot that is perforated, and you take off truma one onto the other, it's still considered truma rabbinically. So there you see that even a growth in a non-perforated pot is considered a growth, and therefore it'll have ramifications by prohibited mixtures. It'll have ramifications for truma. However, v'yachzor v'yitrum, sounds like you still have to go back and take off truma from the pot that was perforated. Is that your biblically obligated to take off truma? But the one that you took off rabbinically on a non-perforated pot. Okay, we'll stop.